Each and every Thursday afternoon, we look forward immensely to talking to Mark Latham, and he joins me on the phone. Hello, Mark.
Hey, Brent, how you doing?
Good, mate. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks.
Did the Dragons win?
Oh, did they win? They won, and the Knights won. That was such a good game of footy. You know, one of the best things about the round of NRL, three teams that generally are thought to be struggling, the Knights, the Tigers and the Titans, all had last-minute classic victories to give their supporters a bit of heart. So I love seeing the footy back, and I love seeing those three teams come home and give their fans a bit of hope for season 2018.
Are you a Footy Show watcher?
Well, I used to be in the heyday when it was funny with Fatty Vaughton, but as you get older and you've got kids, you get to bed a bit earlier, so I haven't been watching the Footy Show. I didn't see Phil Gould on his new version of the show where Peter Beattie couldn't even name the Cronulla Sharks.
I know.
He was given multiple choice. He's supposed to be running the game of rugby league. And poor old Peter from Queensland didn't know the Sharks are the team that play out of the Shire in Sydney. So, hooly-dooly, he's out there talking today about the need to spend all this money on the stadiums in Sydney, but if you can't name the teams in the code, what hope is there for rugby league?
It really was a balls up, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was an absolute shocker, and I don't think there's any excuse. I don't think you'll ever live it down, and I think rugby league's better off, you know, forget about ex-politicians. Just get people in there who are genuinely passionate about the game, know the game, and have got some common sense about what the average fan sitting up in the outer or the grandstand wants.
Well said. Now, this week, Bill Shorten's been out and about. Some have said it's a good tax policy. Others have said it's a disastrous tax policy. His plans to abolish cash refunds for some shareholders. It's certainly reopened the debate about how much government support retirees deserve, Mark.
Well, it has, but I think there's a couple of points about where Labor's headed. One is that in trying to repair the budget to reduce debt and deficit, they haven't come up with any cuts to spending. All they've come up with is an extra $20 billion a year in taxes. Now, you could grab some Year 11 economics student to say, you know, tax this, tax that, and raise revenue that way. It doesn't mean that it's good economic policy. And in this case, I think Shorten and Bowen will have to go back to the drawing board because it doesn't make sense. This is a policy that slugs over 200,000 pensioners in Australia, and there's mounting evidence that the so-called wealthy, the super rich, are not going to be affected at all because they haven't been paying this amount or they can redivert their investments into property. So I'm not too sure it's going to work for Labor. I don't think it's very good economic policy, and I don't know where it's come from because when Peter Costello did this in the year 2000, I was part of the Labor opposition and we supported it. We said that ending double taxation, allowing people to keep their tax office refund, was fair. It built on the Keating dividend imputation reforms in the 80s, and it seemed a logical extension of that. It was waved through by Labor back then, and I don't think it's the sort of cut now or tax increase that's actually achievable in terms of equity, and I think it's going to have undesirable economic impact of flooding the money into property and exposing the economy to boom and bust.
Do you see this as a turning point opportunity for the coalition?
Oh, well, absolutely. If you couldn't prosecute the case here, you should hand in your badge and Malcolm Turnbull go back to merchant banking or something. If you can't explain to the Australian people that it's wrong to slug hundreds of thousands of pensioners with confiscation of their tax office refund, then there's something wrong with this Liberal Party government. You know, Brent, at the end of the day, there's only one good thing the tax office ever does, and that's send out some refund checks.
It's very true,
you know, that rotten tax office, we hate them all for the impact they have on our finances. If you can get a refund check, well, that's one good thing, and now Labor wants to take that away from pensioners. Oh, it's a crook policy, it's not well targeted, and I think Labor backbenchers would be thinking this Chris Bowen, he's a disaster.
Well, I was going to ask you, Mark, who would have designed this? Who would have come up with this?
Well, I think Bowen would have his office working on tax increases. Bowen doesn't come up with spending cuts, it's all extra tax, extra tax, extra tax. So they've had this on the back burner. The timing is interesting. It was unveiled in the week before the Batman by-election where Labor might lose that inner Melbourne seat to the Greens. And if you look at a tax confiscation policy that whacks pensioners, there aren't many seats around the country where that could possibly be popular, but maybe Batman with the Greens down there, the crazy Greens, it could be popular with that constituency. So maybe it's a desperate Labor attempt to get out of trouble in the seat of Batman for Saturday's by-election. If they're doing it for that reason, then it's even crazier because just targeting one seat when it's going to have so many negative consequences in the rest of the country, is not good policy or good politics. So that's probably where it's come from. It's desperate and it's poorly devised, and I can't see that policy being sustainable. I think there's going to have to be a back down.
Well, on the Batman election, there's a story today says lifelong Labor voters living in Batman have called Bill Shorten's radical tax plan, they're calling it radical tax plan, the final straw, and they're ending their support for the ALP. This seems to be all over the place in Batman. You know, people that have never voted for anybody else except for the Labor Party in Batman are saying, no, we're not going to vote for the Labor Party this weekend.
I'm sure there's people of that kind, but Batman is an interesting seat. The southern part of it is very gentrified, Greens, doctors' wives, trendies, hipsters, you know, classic Greens constituency, and Labor lost the state seat of Northcote in the southern part of Batman not long ago. In the northern part of Batman is more your traditional Labor voters, and they win the booths there among the working class people. So I think in the southern part of the seat, the Greens love higher taxes, they love slugging people, they don't really care about the impact. So maybe in the southern part of Batman, the Shorten policy could have some traction. But in the northern part, where you've got your traditional Labor voters, they'll be looking at it and thinking, hang on, you can slug the rich, but how come we're being whacked with this? So I think it could be a mixed result. If Labor loses the seat there on Saturday, it's very, very rare for the opposition to lose a seat. You know, it hasn't happened since, and I think the only other time it's happened in the last 50 years was Simon Crean, the ill-fated Simon Crean in the seat of Cunningham in 2002, lost a by-election there to the Greens. And if Shorten loses this, there'll be some real rumblings about his leadership.
Would you suggest, though, Mark, that David Feeney didn't run in this by-election simply because of the fact that he didn't want to see himself losing, because it was almost tipped as though it was a lay-down misère that the Greens were going to win? Hence, I suppose it's a two-part question, the Coalition didn't put a candidate there. And do you think that is a mistake?
No, I think for the Coalition it's smart. The Cunningham experience in 2002 showed that once the Liberal Party's not in the field, the Labor vote will decline.
Right.
And the Green vote goes up. And that was a disastrous result for Crean's leadership 16 years ago. David Feeney was so unpopular in that seat, he'd had all sorts of problems with his citizenship, pecuniary interest disclosures. He promised to move into the seat and never did, had an investment property there that he conveniently forgot. So I think he was a disaster in that seat, and Labor wouldn't have let him recontest anyway. They put in Jed Carney, former head of the ACTU. She's never set the world on fire, but at least they'd be saying she's a so-called progressive woman in that seat, and maybe gives them some chance of a respectable vote, but most people are thinking the Greens will win it on Saturday.
It's the South Australian election is on this weekend as well, is it not?
It is.
Yeah.
And what an interesting contest.
I know.
There's 47 lower house seats, not only the Xenophon factor, but there's a couple of independents over there and also a Labor defector who's become an independent. They might hold the balance of power along with some Xenophon members. So anything could happen. It's a real unknown.
What do you think will happen? I mean, do you think that Nick Xenophon is a serious candidate?
Well, he's a serious candidate. He's been polling consistently more than 20% of the primary vote. It also opens up like third-party contests in Australia. We're used to the through school and university, we're taught Australia has a two-party system. It's the Coalition versus Labor, but Xenophon has made it interesting because we've now got a three-party system in South Australia, where if you're getting over 20% of the primary vote, you should win some seats, and you're obviously a major influence on who wins the others with your preferences. So a three-party system shakes up Australian politics, and, you know, potentially when he was polling 35% of the primary vote, Xenophon, this was a real earthquake for the major parties. That's come down as people have had a look at him. Xenophon is a bit clownish, and he doesn't have very good policy research and credentials, so he's gone off the boil, but he's still going to be a big player in this, and it's going to be a wake-up call to the major parties. He'll probably have a record low primary vote.
I heard someone say that he didn't perform that well last night. There was a, what would you call it, on Sky News last night? It was hosted, of course, by David Spears.
Yeah, they call it a People's Forum.
That's it, thank you, a public People's Forum.
Questions, I didn't see it. But Xenophon, you know, is more a showman than a serious policy type of person. He's very good at attracting publicity with stunts. He ran an ad there. We spoke about the ad. It was a bit of fun. But I think he needed to back that ad up with some serious policy. And apparently on health policy, and a big issue, how do you run the hospital system in South Australia, his policy was to have an inquiry. people look at that and think, well, my 10-year-old son could have an inquiry into things. It doesn't change them. And, I think he's lacked a bit of substance that way.
So for electionites or election files, it'll be a wonderful weekend this weekend for people who want to watch elections and the results of elections.
You could have Shorten's leadership in play if the Greens win Batman, and you could have people questioning the viability of the two-party system if Xenophon holds a big balance of power in South Australia and it becomes a genuine three-way contest. So, if you're interested in politics, it's the dream weekend, not a national election, but as interesting a set of contests as you'll get.
Four Corners on Monday night did a show on immigration. It was followed by a special hour show on Q&A on immigration, and I suppose for the first couple of days this week all we talked about was immigration. Have we got it right in this country, Mark, do you think?
No, I think the program's way too big. There's a lot of economic evidence now to say some important things, that if you bring too many people into the country, you flood the housing market with people wanting homes to live in, and that sends up prices. That's the housing affordability crisis. If you bring too many people into the labour market, it holds down wages. That's the crisis we've got with sluggish wages growth in Australia. And the only thing really that the pro-Big Australia mob have had to say is, we need the skilled migrants. But there's some very good research out of Monash University now showing that a big majority of non-English speaking supposedly skilled migrants coming into Australia never get to work in their profession. We're bringing in engineers to become taxi drivers.
That's right.
And that's obviously not working. On top of that, you've got massive problems of urban sprawl. Governments can't keep up with infrastructure development, the roads, the schools, the hospitals, the infrastructure that's needed to service these new communities that are springing out of the ground. So why not have a pause? Why not have a pause in population growth? Bring migration down from 200,000 a year to the 20th century average of 70,000, so we can catch up on infrastructure, we can get a bit of wages growth, we can do something on housing affordability and not have any impact on so-called skills shortage, because the research is showing that doesn't exist.
One of the facts and figures that came out of that research, the Census 2016 results show that just 24% of educated migrants aged 25 to 34 actually found professional level jobs by 2016, and that 5% had found managerial jobs. So just 24%.
Yeah, it's a stunning statistic, isn't it? It just shows that the whole argument about skilled migration doesn't stack up, and they've actually changed the rules. We don't bring in so-called skilled migration now to plug holes in the labour market right now in 2018. It's for skill shortages that may or may not occur a decade from now. A decade out. Now, I don't know how government can't run anything. They can't run the NBN. They can't run welfare and economic policy. Indigenous policies are disaster. There's very, very few things the government does well. How would they know what the skill shortages might be 5-10 years from now? So it's all guesswork, it's unnecessary, and I think a population pause, a migration pause in Australia would be welcomed by a lot of people who see these issues and think, why do we need the growth?
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing is that, a large percentage of immigrants want to live in the wrong places. I mean, they want to live on the eastern coast of Australia, and there's too many people there now.
Exactly. If the migrants were flooding into Albury and Wagga and Bathurst and Orange and Scone and places, or Armidale, Tamworth, country centres that could take the extra population without traffic jams and a shortage of schools and hospitals, well, that'd be good, but they're not. They're flooding into the cities, the whole urban conglomerate now, from the Hunter Valley through Sydney to Wollongong. And that's the reality. You're not going to change that. You're not going to find people moving anywhere other than where their communities and their family links are, places like Western Sydney. And as long as that happens, the policy just won't work.
Very true. Finally, Derryn Hinch has made the news again, the Human headline. He has been hospitalised after a fall from an Uber in Melbourne after apparently having just 2 glasses of wine.
Oh, he's had more than 2, hasn't he? How do you fall out of an Uber with a couple of glasses of wine? He's a cheap drunk. I'll tell you what, poor old Darren, he dishes it out. We've got to give him a bit of a razz over this. I don't think the story is feasible, and we wish him well if he's hit his head, but the person I feel sorry for, someone gave up their liver for this bloke, in a liver transplant. They sacrificed their liver. Derryn's been on TV boasting he got it done in a public hospital, didn't cost him anything. We've all funded Derryn's liver transplant, and the fact that he's back on the grog, I think, is a bit of a shocker. If you've got someone else's liver in your system and it's been done at public expense, well, Derryn, stay sober, stay off the grog, and live to 100.
Well, a couple of things there, Mark. Number one, he made such a big song and dance about the fact that he'd found this wonderful non-alcoholic Shiraz that he was drinking. He was a teetotaler now. And the fact that the reason that he had to have the liver transplant in the first place is because he ended up with cirrhosis of the liver as a direct result of drinking 4 and 5 bottles of wine a day.
Yeah, I know. And we funded the repair that's kept him alive, and ultimately he got into the Senate. You know, he's the oldest person ever elected to the Australian Parliament.
He is.
At age 72. Wouldn't you think he'd stay off the grog and look after himself? Come on, Darren. Straighten yourself out.
Do the right thing.
And I can give you advice. I had a run-in with a taxi driver once that was pretty infamous. I hope the Uber driver's okay, as Derryn plonked himself out of the vehicle, and I hope it doesn't happen again.
Good to talk to you, Mark Latham. It's an absolute delight. Thank you so much. Mark Latham's Outsiders, your website?
That's it, yep. The Facebook page, Mark Latham's Outsiders. We have a lot of information there. People don't trust what they read in the newspapers, so go to my Facebook page, and you mightn't agree with it, but you know it's independent, it's honest, and it's straight up and down.
Fantastic. Thanks, mate. Appreciate it, Mark.
Talk next week.
Likewise. Bye-bye. Mark Latham, and I didn't say I hope the Dragons win this weekend, but we also hope the Bunnies win this weekend, don't we? Yeah, always good to catch up with Mark Latham.